Today is January 15th, 2024. The U.S. proxy war against Russia and Ukraine continues. Before I get into developments regarding this conflict, I want to talk about the recent death of American-Chilean citizen Gonzalo Lira in a Ukrainian prison. I have to go over this because there are people who didn't believe that he even was imprisoned, and now they're questioning whether or not he actually died. So via Newsweek, who is Gonzalo Lira, pro-Putin American expat, dies in Ukrainian jail. In this article, the US State Department confirms that he died in prison, and this headline and the entire body of the article is there to justify the wrongful imprisonment and death of Gonzalo Lira. And they say Gonzalo Lira, 55-year-old Chilean American, was imprisoned in Ukraine after allegedly spreading Russian propaganda. This is not a crime. This is not a crime anywhere. Then violating his bail conditions. He violated his bail conditions because he knew he would die in prison if he was sent there. And he was right. Has died in a Ukrainian jail. And then if we scroll down, they talk about how he falsely claimed the Ukrainian government was a neo-Nazi regime. This is an irrefutable fact. Even the US government has acknowledged and has had to work around in order to continue supporting the Ukrainian military and government. Elsewhere in this article, the State Department confirms his death. When asked about Lira's reported death by Newsweek, State Department spokesperson said they could confirm the death of a US citizen in Ukraine. So he has now died. And that puts to rest this malicious lie constructed by a very large group of people who did not like Gonzalo Lira personally, and in order to excuse themselves from having to speak up on his behalf, constructed this lie claiming that he was an SBU asset, that he wasn't really in jail, and now he has now verifiably died in jail. And these people are still going to stand by this malicious lie that they created because they are people without principles. And this tells us that the real threat and obstruction to the human race is not capitalism or imperialism. It's not Washington, Wall Street, London, Brussels. It's our own human nature. And it can threaten and obstruct us on any side of any issue, including this issue, including this conflict in Ukraine. Now, people have said, Brian, you must be really sad. Gonzalo Lira was a very close friend. And to clear this up, Gonzalo Lira was not a close friend of mine. We were associates. I associated with him. We agreed on certain things. We vehemently disagreed on certain things that we would have to agree on if I were to consider him a very close friend. I associated with him anyway because he was a very honest and open-minded man. And it was worth my time to try to convince him to change his position on different topics. And that's the only way we're really going to move forward as a species, is by talking to each other and building common ground we can work on. And with Gonzalo Lira, it was very easy to do. And he had completely changed his point of view on certain very deeply entrenched positions just because he saw enough evidence to convince him otherwise. Shows that he had his personal issues and his personal views, and he could become quite emotional at times. But at the end of the day, he always tried to be rational. He always tried to follow the truth to its logical conclusion, no matter how uncomfortable it made him in the process. And that is very rare to find. That is why I associated with Gonzalo. And I spoke up for Gonzalo Lira solely because it was the right thing to do. It does not matter how you felt about him personally or what other political differences you might have had with him on other issues. He was there in prison because he was speaking up against Nazism in Ukraine, and he was speaking up against the government's brutalization of the people in the Donbas region, and so many other very important issues. And if you couldn't put your personal problems with Gonzalo aside to speak up for his wrongful imprisonment, you're just as bad as the people who put them there in prison to languish and die. You're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. If you want to give anyone your condolences, please give it to his family, his father, who would have done anything to save his son, and to his two young children who he had always talked about and was one of the reasons he stuck around in Ukraine. People were like, why did he stick around in Ukraine? He had family there that he cared about and that he didn't want to be far away from. And that's why he continued to speak up against Ukraine anyways, because he was compelled to do so. And I know exactly how he felt, because that's exactly why I do it, despite me myself not being particularly safe where I live. This is for the exact same reason. I have family here, and then when I see something wrong, I have to speak up and talk about it. And as to why he tried to run to the border and he didn't do this or that or the other things, because he realized how desperate his situation was. And he knew that the chances were very unlikely that he was going to escape prison. He knew he would die in prison, and it was just something at the last minute he haphazardly put together and tried to do to raise awareness for his situation and maybe get some help before being sent back to prison where he knew he was going to die. I hope that clears some questions up that may be surrounding Gonzalo Lira's case. I hope it also makes it very clear that this line of work is extremely dangerous. There are very real consequences for speaking up against injustice, no matter where you are. Yes, he was in Ukraine. Probably wasn't a good idea to speak up in Ukraine about Ukraine. But people who speak up about it in Russia, where they're supposed to be safe, can still be targeted and killed. You're not really safe anywhere. If you decide to speak up about these issues, you're putting yourself in danger no matter what. So I hope people are reminded of that. I hope this doesn't make people fearful, but more determined to speak up and oppose injustice now more than ever. And I hope it helps encourage people to spot injustice even around ourselves and to not turn a blind eye to it. That said, let's continue talking about this conflict that Gonzalo Lira dedicated the last part of his life to covering. Let's continue doing the work that he was so passionate about. And let's make sure that his death was not in vain, that the people responsible for it do not prevail at the end. And it does not look like they will prevail at the end. So as I normally do, let's begin by looking at the live map. This is liveuamap.com. It's a pro-Ukrainian map, so keep that in mind when we look at it. Depending on when you check it day to day, you may or may not see the process of or the aftermath of these large-scale Russian missile and drone attacks, which are happening every couple of days now on a massive scale. I will get into it in just a moment. The admissions from the West and even Ukraine that these strikes are having a devastating impact on Ukrainian combat capabilities. We can see that Avdeevka outside of Donetsk city continues being encircled. We see that it is a very gradual process. It's a very gradual process, and this is the point that I have been making all along, that this is a war of attrition from Russia's point of view. They prepared for this years in advance. They expanded their military industrial capacity specifically to enable a strategy of attrition, exactly like they're carrying out right now. And I was listening to Alexander Mikuris of the Duran talk specifically about this story. This was from earlier this month, January 9th, 2024. Russia to focus on provisioning of troops. But in this statement, it says, in 2023, Ukraine lost over 215,000 troops and 28,000 pieces of equipment. The Kiev regime follows U.S. instructions and does not spare its men on the battlefield. Despite the exhaustion of the human resource and the absence of results on the battlefield, the U.S. cold-bloodedly tries to implement its ambitions for global leadership at the expense of Ukrainian lives. Upon the instructions of Western sponsors, the Kiev regime continues to send its soldiers to slaughter and looks for every possibility to replenish the Ukrainian army. Naturally, it will not change the situation on the line of contact, but will only drag the military conflict out, the defense minister said. We retain the strategic initiative along the entire line of contact. We will continue consistently achieve the goals of the special military operation, Shoigu said. And Alexander Mikuris of the Duran, in a video following this statement, referred to this as aggressive attrition. And I think that is a very accurate way of describing the Russian strategy. They put pressure all along the line of contact. If they see areas where Ukrainian defenses are buckling, they pour more resources there to increase the pressure, to create a breakthrough. You may even see a very quick advance on the battlefield of Russian forces. But overall, the strategy is this incremental advance all along the line of contact, constant pressure, and most importantly, attrition. drawing in Ukrainian men and material and destroying it consistently while preserving Russian men and material to the greatest extent possible. And I just want to point out that even though we hear in the Western media claims that Russia is actually somehow losing more men than Ukraine is, but this is the closest thing to an objective account of Russian losses that we can find. Media Zona, it is a US-backed Russian opposition group. They've created this media platform, Russian Casualties in Ukraine, Media Zona account, updated. This is as of December 29th, 40,000. And if you scroll down, there's this timeline here, and you can see different spikes in Russian losses. You could see huge spikes in losses during the fighting in Bakhmut. And then here in October and November, that is at Avdeevka, and it's much lower than in Bakhmut. Even though Russia is almost certainly losing more men and equipment now in Avdeevka than they had been, say, while defending and defeating the Ukrainian offensive, the summer and fall offensive, it's not even as high as their losses had been in Bakhmut. And in Bakhmut, they had eventually prevailed. They took Bakhmut and the surrounding areas from Ukraine, and they had prevented Ukraine from taking any of that territory back. And I have described and explained this attrition along the line of contact in great detail. And I always try to point out that as that is taking place, that aspect of attrition is taking place along the line of contact, daily losses in men and material for Ukraine. Russia is also conducting these deeper strikes far behind the line of contact, using a whole host of different types of weapons, closer to the line of contact counter battery operations, especially using the Lancet kamikaze drone, a loitering munition, which has a longer and longer range as it is increasingly developed. That is used to take out artillery, counter battery radar, and air defense systems far behind the line of contact. Even further than that, we see Russian cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones taking out and gradually degrading Ukrainian combat capabilities. And one of these capabilities in particular is air defense. One of the most important Ukrainian capabilities behind the line of contact is air defense, and Russia has been systematically dismantling it for several years now. New York Times, many people have covered this, including the Duran, which I highly recommend. They put out daily updates regarding Ukraine specifically. Ukraine's Patriot defenses at work, shuttering booms and bursts of light. The American-provided air defense system have helped Ukraine defend itself against Russian assaults, but Washington has warned that it will not be able to keep them supplied for much longer. And if you have been following my work for a length of time, before the first Patriot system was even deployed to Ukraine, I said that this would happen, because even at the time, before sending the Patriot missile system to Ukraine, there was already a critical shortage of Patriot missile interceptors. This New York Times article says the American-provided air defense systems have helped Ukraine defend itself against Russian assaults, but Washington has warned that it will not be able to keep them supplied for much longer. White House and Pentagon officials have warned that the United States will soon be unable to keep Ukraine's Patriot batteries supplied with interceptor missiles, which can cost $2 million to $4 million apiece. Since the start of the war in February 2022, Russia has directed more than 3,800 drones and 7,400 missiles at Ukrainian towns and cities. And that was a fact that I pointed out in a recent update in regards to transferring longer range missiles to Ukraine. I pointed out the sheer volume of Russian missile and drone attacks carried out on Ukraine, and how existing and even well into the foreseeable future Western military industrial capacity cannot match Russian missile production. Cannot and will not. They make all of these unfounded or even outright untrue claims regarding the Patriot missile system's capabilities. They also do not talk about the number of Patriot missile interceptors produced year to year. And if you check with Lockheed, they talk about anywhere between 500 to 600 interceptors being produced per year. And yet, according to the New York Times, they admit almost 4,000 missiles a year are being launched by Russia at targets in Ukraine for these interceptors to try to stop. And you have to remember that with air defense systems, standard operating procedures to launch at least 2 or more missiles at any one incoming target. That is to increase the probability of intercepting it. So it's not one Patriot missile for every Russian missile that is launched into Ukraine. It's probably going to be more like 2, at least 2 Patriot missiles for every one missile Russia launches. If Russia is launching 4,000 missiles into Ukraine every single year, Ukraine would need at least 8,000 missiles to try to intercept them, which will never happen if the current production rate is between 500 to 600 interceptors a year. And if you remember, before the first Patriot missile system was sent to Ukraine, I went over articles like this. This is from Al Jazeera. Saudi Arabia may run out of interceptor missiles in months. So they're talking about the Patriot missile system. This was from January 2022. This was a month before Russia began the special military operation, and it says Saudi Arabia could run out of interceptor missiles for the US-made Patriot air defense system in months, according to a senior US official cited by the Financial Times newspaper, prompting Riyadh to appeal to regional allies for help to replenish the stock. And that's eventually what they ended up having to do, borrow missiles from neighbors who also had Patriot missiles in their stockpiles, because the US was incapable of producing enough each year to replace the missiles Saudi Arabia was using. But beyond a lack of quantity, there was also a quality issue that I pointed out before the first Patriot missile system was even sent to Ukraine. This is an article from NBC News, and this was even earlier. This was 2019. And the article is titled, "Why US Patriot Missiles Failed to Stop Drones and Cruise Missiles Attacking Saudi Oil Sites. The US is having trouble defending against low-flying drones and cruise missiles after years of the Pentagon focusing on longer-range threats." The United States is sending American troops to the Middle East to provide better air and missile defenses after an aerial attack on Saudi oil targets last week. The raid began around 4 a.m. on the morning of September 14, 2019, with explosions rippling across Aramco oil processing facilities inside Saudi Arabia as the sound of defensive automatic machine gun fire rang in the air. In theory, the oil facilities both lay under the defensive umbrella of Patriot PAC-2 surface-to-air missile batteries that the U.S. sold Saudi Arabia to intercept aircraft and missiles up to 100 miles away. However, if Saudi radars detected the 18 triangular drones and 7 cruise missiles, judging by recovered debris, that bombarded them last week, they did so too late. Triangular drones and ballistic and cruise missiles, and there's also ballistic missiles that they refer to. That all sounds very familiar. That sounds like the type of weapons that not only is Russia using in Ukraine right now, but additional weapon systems that they are reportedly seeking from their allies, in, say, in North Korea or Iran. The triangular drones refer to the Shahid drones that Russia refers to as Garan 2 drones. I will be talking about those in a little bit more depth here in just a moment. But if it was a problem back then for the Patriot missile system, it almost certainly is a problem now, both in terms of quantity and quality. The system is not able to defend against these threats against Saudi Arabia from Yemen, and most certainly not the much more numerous and capable threats coming from Russia targeting positions in Ukraine. Then the NBC News article goes through the development history of American and NATO air defense systems, how they've been neglected in favor of air superiority fighter aircraft. They talk about how the missiles and drones that Yemen was using against these Saudi targets are much cheaper than the Patriot missiles that are being used to try to intercept them. And of course, if they intercept them, it still works in favor of Yemen, who is depleting Saudi Arabian air defenses. But if they make it through and they hit their target, it's obviously also causing more damage. NATO's short-range air defense capabilities, SHORADs. This is a capability they know they need to develop. They've been trying to develop this, but this is still years and years away from reaching the quality and quantity needed to succeed in the type of environment we see in Ukraine. And as I predicted, if there was already a critical shortage of Patriot missiles before sending them to Ukraine. Sending them to Ukraine would only make it worse. And I even said at the time, just like Saudi Arabia had to borrow Patriot missiles that were in other nations' stockpiles, Ukraine would end up having to scrape together Patriot missiles from all four corners of the globe. And that is exactly what has ended up happening. From the BBC, Japan to send Patriot missiles to US, which may aid Ukraine. This was just last month, December 2023. Japan says it will send Patriot air defense missiles to the US after changing its arms export rules and a shift away from its pacifist policies. The White House has welcomed the move, which could free up the US to send its own stockpile to Ukraine. Western powers have been running out of ammunition to supply Ukraine in its defense against Russia's invasion. And just like everything else, this is not an actual solution. This is a stopgap to buy time, despite the fact that no actual real solution is being pursued. Let's look at this Australia Defense Magazine article from November 2023. Lockheed Martin says Patriot missile could replace anything and everything. And I'm going over this article because they do talk a little bit about production numbers, and they're talking about how the Patriot missile could eventually replace all air defense missiles used elsewhere. It says, the latest missile segment enhancement version has been in full rate production since 2017, with 500 produced each year at the plant in Arkansas, ramping up to 550 by end of year. Lockheed Martin is looking to further lift production to 650 missiles per year by the end of 2026. So years from now, they will be up to 650 missiles a year, which again is nowhere near the production rates of Russian missiles and nowhere near where Ukraine requires to repel these missile attacks from Russia. And this is becoming such a problem that even the Western media is unable to cover it up any longer. Ukraine has deficit of anti-aircraft guided missiles Air Force. So this is from Reuters, January 9th, 2024. It says Ukraine has a deficit of anti-aircraft guided missiles nearly 2 years after Russia's full-scale invasion. Again, the whole point here is this strategy of attrition, grinding down not just Ukrainian forces and equipment along the line of contact, but also Ukrainian military capabilities deep behind the line of contact, including and especially air defenses. So this was the Air Force spokesperson Yuri Inat saying this. Ukraine has relied heavily on military and financial aid from its Western allies since the invasion in February 2022, but political wrangling has delayed the disbursement of major aid packages for this year. Inat told Ukrainian television that Ukraine has used a considerable reserve of missiles defending itself against recent attacks, and added, it is clear that there is a deficit of anti-aircraft guided missiles. But we just saw from Western sources discussion about the actual output of Patriot missile interceptors. Even if every single missile the US produced went to Ukraine, it would not be enough. And no amount of money freed up for use in Ukraine is able to buy missiles that simply do not exist. The article continues, Russia has stepped up missile and drone attacks on Ukraine in the past few weeks, firing hundreds of missiles and drones at Ukrainian cities far behind the front line. Ukrainian officials have said, in the latest strike this week, Russia fired 51 missiles of various types, killing at least 4 people and hitting civilian infrastructure, they said. Ukraine said it had shot down 18 of the cruise missiles that were fired, a much lower rate of interception than usual. Ukrainian officials attributed this to the large number of ballistic missiles fired by Russia, as they are harder to intercept. Then there is this CNN article here. Missile blitz. Jet drones, night camouflage. Kiev warns how Russia could overwhelm air defenses. This was from January 11th, 2024. It talks about crumbling Ukrainian air defenses. It says new tactics have also come into play. Some changes are simple. Russia has started painting its Iranian-made drones black, camouflaging them against the night sky. And this constant attempt to claim that the Garand 2 is Iranian-made when all evidence points to the fact that Russia did buy a number of them from Iran. They also bought the rights to manufacture them domestically. Where they're manufacturing them domestically, and they are modifying and upgrading them as this conflict continues. It also says others are more sophisticated. These changing of tactics by the Russians. The Russians have moved the engine exhausts on some drones from the rear to the front in an effort to confuse anti-air batteries using thermal sights, members of the Ukrainian unit told CNN, because they're interviewing Ukrainian air defense units. With Ukrainian media reports of jet-powered drones replacing Russia's slower propeller-powered models, officials have acknowledged it's a threat that's on their radar. Speaking on national TV, Ukrainian Air Force Command spokesperson Yuri Inat said a jet-powered version of the Iranian Shahed drones favored by Moscow would function like a mini cruise missile. They are likely to have a smaller payload, but much faster cruising speeds, perhaps more than 500 kilometers per hour, he said, making them harder to shoot down. Ukrainian officials haven't yet confirmed if these drones have been used in Ukraine. And do you remember when the Shahed or Garan 2 first turned up, how the Western media, Ukrainian officials said, look at how desperate Russia has become. They're going hat in hand to the Iranians, begging for weapons to sustain military operations in Ukraine. And now we can see that these drones have been a major threat to Ukrainian air defenses, and it is a growing threat and an evolving threat. This article from The Drive, this part of The Drive called The War Zone, Russia may have started using jet-powered Shahed drones in Ukraine. Iranian-designed jet-powered Shahed 238 drones used by Russia would be much faster and harder to shoot down than prop-powered Shahed 136. And the 136 is in the back there. Kind of, that's what that kind of looks like. And here's the jet-powered drone with an air intake and the jet engine in the back versus the propeller-driven Garan 2 that Russia has been using up until now. And the article says, evidence that Russia is using Iranian jet-powered Shahed 238 kamikaze drones to strike targets in Ukraine has emerged. The Shahed 238 is derived from the Shahed 136, which Russian forces have already been using for more than a year. If this proves to be the case, the war zone, as the war zone previously explored in detail, the Shahed 238's increased speed over its propeller-engined predecessors and other additional capabilities present serious new challenges for Ukrainian air defenses. So Ukrainian air defense capabilities are being stripped away by this Russian strategy of attrition. They're not doing big arrow offensive operations to try to capture Kiev or other strategic positions along the line of contact. They are whittling down Ukrainian combat capabilities. As they do that, they're increasing their own capabilities. And if you were to try to visualize this as a graph where Russian capabilities are increasing, Ukrainian capabilities are decreasing, there's going to be a point where they intersect, and eventually where Russian operations along the line of contact will just become so overwhelming. Crumbling Ukrainian capabilities will no longer be able to hold them back, and we will start to see an increase in breakthroughs, in that incremental advance increasing in speed until eventually there are local or total collapses in Ukraine's fighting capacity, allowing the Russian military to move quicker and more openly on the battlefield, as a lot of people imagine that they might do in a big arrow offensive. In addition to all of this that I just read, we are now also hearing increased talk about Russia acquiring weapons from North Korea and Iran, ballistic missiles in particular. We have articles like this from CNN. Russia appears poised to purchase ballistic missiles from Iran, official says. Why is this important? Is it because Russia is running out of their own ballistic missiles and they need an additional source of ballistic missiles to compensate? Or do Iranian ballistic missiles offer capabilities that Russia would find very convenient to purchase, test out, and begin adapting for their own use? Just like they did with the Shahed, now known as Garan 2 drones. If you read through this article, they talk about ballistic missiles. They never really say which ones that they're looking at, but I have seen talk about the Zulfigar, which has a range of up to 700 kilometers. Currently, the ballistic missile of choice that Russia has been using, ground-launched ballistic missile of choice, is the Iskander There's a cruise missile variant, but the ballistic missile version has a range of 500 kilometers. Why 500 kilometers and not 700 kilometers? It's not as if Russia cannot design a ballistic missile that can go 700 kilometers or further, but their missile systems have been designed with the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in mind, the INF Treaty, which the US in recent years had unilaterally withdrawn from so that they can begin developing missiles with longer ranges, ground-launched missiles with longer ranges that they especially would like to use against China, but also against Russia. And because they've walked away from this treaty, it allows now Russia to more openly develop these missiles. But Iran and China were never signatories of this agreement. They have missile systems that span a whole wide range of ranges and capabilities that they would not have been able to if they had been a party to this treaty. While obviously Russia could develop their own longer range ballistic missiles, if Iran already has a battle-tested system, they can just start there. Instead of starting from scratch, they can start from an existing missile that's already battle tested, and they could do just like they did with the Shahed drones. They can adopt it into something of their own, improve it, modify it, adapt it to their own needs in Ukraine and elsewhere. And so that looks like what they're probably going to be doing. And these ballistic missiles that Iran makes, and also cruise missiles and drones, Russia is not the only country that is acquiring them and adapting them to their own needs. The military in Yemen has also been using Iranian-based systems to great effect. This whole threat that Saudi Arabian Patriot missiles were responding and failing to is owed not just to drones like the Shahed, but also long-range ballistic missiles like the Zulfikar. And as a matter of fact, we have an article from IISS. It's another one of these US government and corporate funded think tanks. This was from March 2021. Ansarullah's missile and munitions launches flex Saudi responses. And it says on March 7th, again, 2021, the Aramco oil facility at Ras Tanura on the east coast of Saudi Arabia was targeted. The Samad-3 direct attack UAV was used, a drone, essentially, while there were also close-range ballistic missile attacks on Asur and Jazan in southwest Saudi Arabia. Ansarullah stated that the Zulfikar ballistic missile was used in the attack on Ras Tanura. If correct, this would support indications that the missile is likely an extended range version of the Iranian Qiyam family of missiles. The range required to reach Ras Tanura facility from Ansarullah-held territory in Yemen is more than 1,200 kilometers. So the ranges of these ballistic missiles might be even further than 700 kilometers, or they may be easily modified to reach longer distances. We simply don't know, but this is going to be one of the things we should look out for in 2024. Again, as Ukrainian capabilities are degraded, Russian capabilities increase in both quantity and quality. They're acquiring capabilities that they did not previously have, and they are going to use them to continue mounting pressure on Ukrainian defenses and to degrade military capabilities. And finally, what is the impact of this, and how is Ukraine reacting to all of this? This is an article from Reuters, exclusive. Ukraine needs more attack aircraft for war effort, ground forces commander. This is January 12th, 2024. And essentially, this commander, Colonel General Alexander Sursky, he's essentially asking for an entire Air Force worth of warplanes and helicopters of all kinds. The article says Ukraine's ground force commander said that Kiev needed more military aircraft for its war effort, such as US A-10 attack jets, to support infantry and planes that could fire long-range cruise missiles. Now, the A-10 is a ground attack aircraft. It operates by traveling at low altitudes. It pops up very quickly, acquires its target, fires maybe missiles, rockets, guided, unguided. It also has a powerful 30 millimeter cannon. It can use depleted uranium as ammunition. and then it goes back down to low altitudes and tries to escape and evade air defenses in any particular location. But the A-10 does not represent a military capability that Ukraine did not already have. They had the Sukhoi Su-25. That is a ground attack aircraft very similar to the A-10. Ukraine had between 20 or 30 of them at the beginning of the special military operation. I've talked about in the past nations across Europe who had these jets and other jets and helicopters in their inventories that they really weren't using, or that they were in the process of replacing with Western-made warplanes and helicopters, that they had been transferring these to Ukraine as Ukraine was losing these on and over the battlefield. And as I've mentioned before, incorporating an entirely new warplane that your pilots, or new weapon systems that your soldiers have never used before, that could take months, even years, to incorporate it into your armed forces, where they can use these new systems, these new vehicles effectively. Ukraine would not be able to receive and use A-10s anytime in the near future effectively. The only reason they would be asking for A-10 aircraft would be because they are out of Su-25 aircraft. They have nothing left, and they're willing to accept the fact that they're not going to be able to use the A-10 effectively, but they suppose that it's better than having nothing at all. The Reuters article talks about the A-10. It says it's for destroying land-based targets, tanks, artillery, everything that counters the infantry. This is Sersky talking, and he added that attack helicopters such as the AH-64 Apache and the AH-1 Super Cobra, as well as the UH-60 Black Hawk, could also play an important role. So again, an entire Air Force worth of aircraft. This lumped in together with the F-16s that they're demanding, this is an entire Air Force worth of aircraft that they're asking for, and that they would have to incorporate and adapt to use on the battlefields, weapon systems that their troops, their pilots have never used before, would have to be trained from scratch to use. And not just the pilots, but also the maintenance crews. And it's not just the maintenance crews working on the aircraft, but also the supply chains that you have to create for all of these spare parts and systems that your existing Air Force never used. And we saw this entire process unfold exactly as predicted, with the weapon systems being unable to be used effectively on the battlefield, leading to the failure and defeat of the Ukrainian offensive last year in regards to artillery, main battle tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles that the Ukrainians trained on for a very short period of time. They were unable to maintain themselves, that they got damaged. They would have to go all the way to the border, hundreds of kilometers away, and then come back. And we saw what a disaster that all was. And then when you're talking about aircraft, you're talking about something that is even more complicated and difficult to use effectively and also maintain on the battlefield. This is how the Reuters article ends. It ends by saying, despite near stalemate along the front line, and they say near stalemate because that is an admission that it's not actually a stalemate, that Russia has the upper hand and then they are gaining ground on Ukraine. They talk about the front line, some 1,000 kilometers long. Colonel General Alexander Sersky, who oversaw the defense of Kiev in early 2022 and Ukraine's lightning counter-offensive in Kharkiv region later that year, said future breakthroughs were still possible. Asked if there could be a turning point in the war in Ukraine's favor, which is an admission that right now everything is not going in Ukraine's favor, he said, "I think there are always chances. You just need to find them and use them." He added that it was impossible for Russia to have built robust defenses everywhere, and that there were always weak spots because of the landscape and other factors. And it's obvious that the actual answer is that there is going to be no breakthroughs. There are not going to be any breakthroughs or any future positive developments for Ukraine. If there are any future positive developments for Ukraine, it will be based solely on luck, and more accurately based on Russia making some critical and very obvious mistake. If Russia makes some huge mistake, then maybe Ukraine has a chance to improve its position along the line of contact, even if just locally. As Ukrainian capabilities, including air power and air defenses, are degraded, we can see that Russia continues expanding its own capabilities, both in quantity and quality. And these, these Iranian-designed drones, for example, that Russia has adopted. Again, everyone was laughing at them in the beginning. Nobody is laughing now, not at what they have achieved over time, and not what these weapon systems are now evolving into. These drones may not be taking out high-value targets, but they are forcing Ukraine to expend its air defense munitions. And it is imposing a growing strategic crisis on Ukraine. And now just imagine this whole process that took place with these Iranian-acquired drones takes place with longer-range ballistic missiles. Just imagine how effective that will be for Russia and what impact it'll have on Ukraine's combat capabilities in the course of this conflict. Just imagine. And again, these are things that we're going to have to continue keeping a very close eye on throughout 2024. I will continue covering these developments as they unfold. In the meantime, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. Check out the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. Also in the video description below are all the links that I referenced, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip past them. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. To everyone who has been supporting my work, I greatly appreciate that, whether it's once a month, through one-time donations, or even just sharing my work with others, getting the word out there. I greatly appreciate that. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.